Hello everyone and welcome to this event on psychologically safe conflict courtesy of MediateGuru UK. For those of you who are new, I'd like to start by saying a little bit about MediateGuru. MediateGuru is a social initiative led by members across the globe. The aim of the organisation is to bridge the gap between the public and litigation by creating a social awareness campaign showcasing mediation as the future. So far, we have a reach in over 100 countries, and we strive to provide you the best lecture series so that you can have access to the best speakers around the globe, adding value to your legal studies and your legal career. I feel honoured to welcome our esteemed guest for today, Marie Coombes. Marie has worked for Royal Mail for 17 years, specialising in conflict resolution and mediation training, change management, employee and industrial relations, and employee engagement. In 2014, she became an accredited mediator, and during her 5 years as a full-time in-house workplace mediator, she completed over 200 cases with a success rate of 95%. In 2020, she won the Workplace Mediator of the Year award in recognition of her excellence in the field of mediation, including her expertise in mental health. Marie has particular interest in mental health. Prior to leaving Royal Mail, she was a team mentor for mental health issues in mediations, designing and delivering a half-day training course on mediation and mental health, as well as being a business-wide mental health ambassador. Without further ado, I am now going to pass the floor over to Marie. Remember, everyone, you can leave your questions in the chat box below, as we will have a short Q&A session at the end. Marie, I'm going to open your slides now. I won't forget.
Thank you very much, and hello everybody. It's great to have been asked to run another session for MediateGuru. I have been on previous sessions, so some of you may know me from that session. Today, as Phoebe has said, I'm going to focus on psychologically safe conflict. And just to position this, obviously my background is workplace mediation. This is a subject I'm talking about in the sense of those interpersonal relationships that we have. So whether that be with somebody you study with, somebody that you work with, whether it be even a family member, all the things I'm going to talk about today are relevant to mediation, absolutely, any form of mediation, but they are also some really good life skills for you to take away for today as well. So hopefully you'll enjoy it. As Phoebe said, please put any questions in the chat as I'm going through. I will more than make time at the end to answer those questions. But let's get started. So what I'm going to cover today is what is psychological safety. So this is a phrase that's gaining more and more notice, certainly in the business world. It relates to our mental well-being, but I'll explain a little bit more about it in a second. I'll talk about why it's relevant in terms of conflict, and I'll also then talk you through briefly what psychologically safe conflict will look like. So that's what we're covering today. So psychological safety. This is essentially being able to show and employ oneself without fear of negative or destructive consequences. Okay, so just take a second just to think about situations you've been in when you've fallen out with somebody, or when you've been in the workplace, or when you've been around a group of people. How do you feel in those situations? Do you feel safe to show the real you? Do you feel safe to bring your whole self to that conversation? That's essentially what psychological safety is. Okay, it's being able to bring your whole self. So in terms of what psychological safety is, there are loads of theories out there now in terms of psychological safety. The way I talk about it is in terms of the 3 C's. So those 3 C's are connection, consistency, and contribution. So just taking each of those in turn, think about yourselves at this point. Think about Phoebe. I'm not sure if there's any problems in the background. There's a couple of messages in the chat saying there are problems. I'm hoping everybody can still hear me.
Could everyone who's experiencing some trouble please try rejoining, reconnecting? Sometimes we do have a few issues, but it seems like the majority can hear you and see you okay.
That's all right then, I'll carry on.
Yeah.
Yeah, so in terms of the 3 C's, connection, consistency and contribution. So connection, that's our need to belong. Now that doesn't matter whether it's in the workplace, it's at home, it's in college, university, whatever environment we are in, we have this need to belong. We need to feel included. We need to feel that connection with those around us. We need to feel engaged, and we need to know we have good standing with those people around us as well, that we have a good reputation. Connection's all about mutual respect. It's also about mutual trust. That's being able to be trusted, but also being able to trust those around you are competent and are capable of doing what you need them to do. It's also about being accepted. So I mentioned on the previous slide that psychological safety is essentially being able to bring your whole self to a situation. But the connection part is particularly about being accepted for and to be able to be your whole self. Now, each of these 3 C's will have greater importance to some people than others. So connection may not be a huge issue for somebody, but contribution and consistency might be something that they really strive for. So one of the things to understand in terms of psychological safety is how important these 3 C's are to you. It's also important to understand what makes you you, and I'm going to touch on that in a second when I talk about something called the frame of reference. So that connection is also based on what makes you you. In terms of consistency, that's our need for predictability. We as humans don't like change. It's not something that our brains are particularly good at dealing with. It's also something that, certainly in my experience, those interpersonal relationships where change is involved can cause major issues because that change isn't dealt with properly. We need to have a level of autonomy. We need to have a level of control over our lives. Now, I don't know if it's the same for you, but certainly in the UK, there's been a steep increase in anxiety and depression since the COVID-19 pandemic started. The majority of that anxiety and depression has come from the lack of control over our lives. So in the UK, we've had a number of lockdowns. We've been told we have to stay at home. The control over our lives has been taken from us, and that's resulted in quite a high level of anxiety and depression. That's why consistency and the control element of consistency is so important. So we have a natural suspicion of change. We also have issues in terms of making sure we are treated fairly. So one of the biggest things I hear in workplace mediation quite often is, well, he's done something wrong and he hasn't been punished for it. But when I did it wrong, I was punished for it. So it's that understanding what fairness is to you and to those around you. Do you feel you're being treated fairly? Is the way you are treated consistent? Okay, so that's the second C. The final C is contribution. So this is an environment that leaves you free to make mistakes. You're able to take chances and you're able to experiment in order to develop and learn. By doing that, that builds confidence in those around you, but it also builds a huge amount of confidence in yourself. You're given the option to make mistakes. And as we probably all know, actually sometimes learning from our mistakes is far more powerful than learning when we get it right. We're able to speak up and challenge without fear of retribution. So our contribution is valued. You know, we can raise our own opinions, we can raise our own outlook on life without fear of being shouted down, for want of a better phrase. And what that does, it encourages us to maintain a level of reputation, which builds our self-confidence and our self-esteem. It affects how we are seen, how we think we are seen, and it affects how we see ourselves as well. So contribution is all about value. Psychological safety isn't about personality contests. That's one of the things that, in my experience, people have got mixed up about. Being psychologically safe doesn't mean that you capitulate to whatever's in front of you. It's not about being outspoken or reducing performance. Some examples of where an environment isn't psychologically safe. Your mistakes are held against you. You can't challenge or raise issues. There's been some really big disasters over the last few years that have been deemed to have been due to human error. There was a tram crash down in Croydon, I believe it was, in the UK, that was partly as a result of people within the organisation not being able to challenge when they saw things weren't going in the way they should be doing, when things weren't being done properly. The Challenger explosion is another example of that, the space shuttle. I'm sure you can think of your own examples where people have not been able to speak up and something has happened off the back of that. In terms of mediation, obviously that is often on a much smaller level, but if people don't feel safe to challenge, that can have a real impact on our anxiety and depression and our mental state. Psychological safety is, a lot of psychological safety is about perception. It's about how we see the world. So psychological safety is very individual. And that leads me on to what I was going to talk about, which is the frame of reference. So the frame of reference is a theory that was discovered in the 70s. It's talked about a lot on mental health first aid courses in the UK. And essentially what it's doing is explaining that we're all different and why we are different. So the frame of reference, it's the frame through which we view the world. It's the window on the world. It's the lens through which we see the world around us. And that is based on these 10 things. So it's based on our values. What do we value in life? What's important to us? Do we have an illness or a disability? I won't go through every single one of these. I'll just pick out one or two of them. How old are we? I know the way I used to deal with conflict when I was 17 or 18 is very different to the way I deal with conflict now that I've got a bit of experience under my belt. What work do you do? What's your background and upbringing? What's your family and relationships like? If you had a tough childhood, your view on life is going to be very different from somebody who didn't particularly have a tough childhood, who maybe had an easier run when they were a child. Trauma is also another significant one. If you are subjected to trauma early in life, that can have a massive impact, as you can probably imagine, on the rest of your life and can really inform how you view the world. And obviously, in terms of our cultural influences as well, we all look at the world through our culture. In the UK, we look at the world in a particular type of way. Elsewhere, it'll be relevant to there. Conflict arises from the incompatibility in terms of our frames of reference. So I've given a couple of examples. Somebody who's sort of 18, 19 may deal with a situation or look at a situation very, very differently from somebody who's in their 30s or 40s or even older. It can affect our opinions. So opinions you may have had at a young age become very different the older you get. I mentioned about childhood trauma having a lasting impact on somebody's life. They will view the world through that trauma probably for the rest of their lives. So it's important to understand how we see the world, because that influences how we deal with conflict, how we view conflict, how we view the world around us, and also the level of psychological safety that we need, because that is as individual as we are as human beings. So the next slide, I put it up and then I realised that it's one of those that I've got to hide very quickly. So the next slide I'm going to show you, just want you to have a look at it for a brief second. I'm just going to show it for a second and then take it away again. And if you can just put in the chat what you think you see. Okay, so 3, 2, 1. I'll take it away again. So if you can just put in the chat, what I'm demonstrating here is about perception. So quite often our frame of reference relates to our perception of the world. Conflict relates to our perception of the world. Okay, so this is to understand that perception can be different. I'll see something differently to how somebody else does. Phoebe, was there something you just wanted to jump in? I'd be interested in your thoughts on that picture.
Sorry, there's a bit of a lag in the chat. Everyone, if you can write what you think you saw in the picture. I saw a man with a hose and some water on the ground.
Yeah.
Does anybody else want to say what they saw? There is a bit of a delay.
No, that's okay. I'll just give everybody a second and then I'll carry on anyway. That's okay, I'll move on. The man wasting water. Yeah, potentially. So I'll show you it again for a little bit longer. That is actually a chalk drawing.
Wow.
That is actually a chalk drawing. The person who drew it is the guy in the picture, and that has sort of demonstrated straight away. It's a guy called Julian Beaver. He does a lot of 3D chalk drawings. If you get a chance to look him up, they're fascinating, his drawings, but they're really good in terms of demonstrating perception, because your immediate perception, Phoebe, and also the couple of comments that are in the chat, was that was water.
Yeah, it looks really real.
Our frame of reference doesn't tell us, oh, it's a chalk drawing. It must be real water. So that clearly demonstrates that we look at the world through a particular lens, and that informs our perception of the world around us.
Wow. I did not expect that.
So I'll carry on. I'm going to start talking a little bit now about what conflict is. And the pictures that you can see on screen, I'm sure you can probably relate to some of those. Conflict generally is felt to not be a pleasant experience. Okay, all of those pictures, sad face, feeling angry, not wanting to talk to the boss. You know, they're not good pictures. The important thing to remember in terms of conflict is it's about understanding that we view that conflict through our perception. So you can't change how people treat you or what they say about you. All you can do is change how you react to it. All you can do is change how you view it. So when we talk about conflict, we talk about conflict in two ways. But first of all, it's important to note that conflict is absolutely 100% unavoidable. That's because we all walk through life with our different frames of reference. Okay, so it doesn't matter where you come from, who you are, you will fall into conflict with somebody at some point in your life because of that difference in frame of reference and that difference in terms of our perception. What we do have control over is whether it is destructive conflict or whether it is psychologically safe, otherwise known as constructive conflict. So destructive conflict is harmful to everybody involved. It damages reputations. It damages trust between people. It causes problems in terms of people's reputations. And as we all probably know, when there's a conflict situation, it rarely just involves the two people directly involved. I know when I've done workplace cases, I'm seeing a huge rise at the moment in team mediations. So I've been doing a lot of mediations. In fact, I've got one on the books at the moment that is between 20 people. It's a conflict that started out as just two people and it has spread to the rest of the team, the rest of the working environment. The behaviours that have been seen, gossiping, aggression, behaviours that have been described as bullying, These are standard behaviours in destructive conflict. Someone is to blame. It's about finding justice. And everybody's attitudes and actions will continue to drive that destructive conflict as well. So every new person that gets added will have their own opinion and their own perception on what's going on, which adds more fuel to the fire. Constructive conflict, psychologically safe conflict, is productive. It has more of a positive, or at the very least a neutral spin to it, and it's a future-focused experience. So what we're talking about here is moving away from blame and instead talking about what the future is going to look like, accepting something's happened in the past. What are we going to do to change it so it doesn't happen again? In terms of the type of mediation I do, workplace interpersonal mediation, everybody that is in the mediation room wants to resolve the conflict, and I'm there to facilitate and support them through those conversations. I give them the opportunity for open and honest communication that is respectful, that pays attention to needs and what people need to get out of the process. It's about empathy. So when conflict is handled constructively, when it's handled in a psychologically safe way, it drives creativity and innovation. And it also generates a healthy interpersonal environment. It also generates a safer environment, both psychologically and physically, because if something is going wrong, if there is a problem that needs to be fixed, people are not in fear of challenging. So those clashes in our frame of reference, just linking the two together for a second, those clashes are an integral part of what makes us who we are. So that's where the potential for dispute lives. On some days, there might be minor annoyances. So an argument with somebody on a Wednesday afternoon may well have blown over by Thursday morning. But if you have it on a Monday morning, it may set the scene for your whole week. Some of these are minor annoyances, barely register on your radar. The next day could become a huge issue. There are several reasons why something may have the potential to become destructive conflict if it's not handled in a psychologically safe way. So how important is the situation to us? Is it something we are heavily invested in? Is it a relationship that we find really, really important? We need to consider what our usual reaction is in terms of a dispute. So what is our conflict style? I'm going to come to that in a second. How do we normally react in a conflict situation? Do we have a support network to help us resolve conflict? Do we have the resources to resolve it in a constructive way? And also, how do we feel on any particular day? So just to understand a little bit more, we often think as conflict of being the thing we are faced with. I don't know if any of you have heard of the mediator's iceberg, but what this demonstrates is that conflict is more than what we just see. It links to what really sits underneath. So when we're in a conflict, think about those situations where you have been in conflict. When you're in those situations, what you are seeing are behaviours. So I mentioned earlier on about bullying behaviour, intimidating behaviour. We'll be making demands on each other. You know, I demand an apology. We'll have positions and our own perception will be our truth. What we see is our truth. In conflict, there are three truths. There is your truth, there is the other person's truth, and there is the truth. Rarely in conflict, certainly interpersonal conflict, it's a bit different when it's legal related. But in interpersonal conflict, the key point to remember is that we both come with our own truths. We both come with our own perceptions. And actually, the truth is often irrelevant. It's about understanding each other's perceptions. What we don't see, what sits underneath the water level of the iceberg, is the impact and feelings that we have as a result of that conflict. So, for example, a lot of the things that I hear during conflict, I can't sleep. My anxiety levels have increased. I've had to go and see my doctor because my depression has triggered. Or people have had to go for support because they've developed a mental health condition off the back of a conflict. It's affecting their relationships at home. They're taking it home with them. Hopes and fears. We lose our ability to see what the future will look like when we're in the depths of destructive conflict. And it can also affect our beliefs and values as well. What sits at the very heart of conflict, what sits right at the very bottom, which we rarely delve into, are our needs. So they could be basic needs. They could be, you need to have a roof over your head. You need to have food on the table. You need to have air to breathe. But as you'll notice, some of that list on the right-hand side relates directly back to psychological safety again. That need to belong, that need for fairness, that need for autonomy. Those 3 C's come into play massively here. What we need at the heart of conflict is to feel psychologically safe. That's why in terms of interpersonal mediation, we are always aiming to encourage people to engage in constructive conflict, because that allows people to take back control of the situation and restore their psychological safety. So just one final bit in terms of understanding what interpersonal conflict actually is. This is the Kubler-Ross grief curve. So the solid line demonstrates what we go through when we have a feeling of loss. So it was originally designed in terms of grief. In terms of our needs, if our needs are not met, that automatically creates a loss, very similar to grief. It may not be as deep-seated, it may not be as upsetting, but it still develops that feeling of loss. So think for a second about a conflict you've been involved in. You may feel shock, you may feel denial, you will almost certainly feel frustration and anger. When we walk away from that conflict that hasn't been resolved, we can dip into a depression. Not necessarily medical depression, medically defined depression, but we move into that point where we feel upset. That's where our feelings and our reactions come in. Over time, we may move towards bargaining. We may say, move me to another department. But eventually what happens is we move towards acceptance. Now with destructive conflict, that depression phase can be very, very deep and take a long time to get over. Psychological safety is important at this point. That's represented by the dotted line. That's where constructive conflict actually lessens the impact of that conflict because our needs are still being met. We're still in a situation where we can talk, where we can try to resolve it. And actually, we can miss out a big chunk of that loss. So just an example in terms of the 3 C's. A loss of connection. When we go through conflict may have destroyed that relationship. It may have made that job role untenable. You may have to leave that job. You may not be able to sit in that class anymore. Loss of consistency. You lose control over the situation. One of the things that I hear quite often when I'm doing workplace mediations, HR have had to fix it. Human resources have had to fix it for us. The decision's been taken out of our hands. We've lost the autonomy over the situation. And finally, just in terms of the 3rd C, contribution, that loss of reputation. If you're in conflict with somebody, quite often those around you know about it, and it could affect the way that they look at you. It could affect the esteem that they hold you in. It also represents a loss of voice as well at this point. If you're in conflict with that person, you're not able to have a constructive conversation with them, and it can have wide-ranging effects from that point of view. So that's conflict in a nutshell. Phoebe, I'm going to need the poll to come up in a second. got 3 questions for you in a second, but I'm just going to talk you through these 5 conflict styles. So I mentioned earlier on that one of the reasons, one of the differences between constructive and destructive conflict is how we react to a conflict situation. So this is the Thomas Kilmann model of conflict, the conflict styles model. It's across 2 axes. So on the left-hand side, we have how important your goals are. How important is it that you reach your goals? And across the bottom, how important is the relationship? So just walking through these 5 animals, the turtle in the bottom left-hand corner, they're classed as the avoidant technique. So as I'm going through these, have a think about what style you most feel connected to at this point. So as I'm talking through these, are you a turtle? Are you a fox? Are you an owl? Okay. Have a think about what you would prefer to be. So turtle tends to avoid conflict. Not necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes the conflict isn't something that is worthwhile getting involved in. Other times you maybe don't have the skills to deal with that conflict. In that instance, your goals aren't important, and actually you're not too bothered about the relationship either. In the top left, we have the shark. This, in the UK, is referred to as the command and control style of management. So the do as I say, not as I do. But it's also seen a lot in the military and in environments where it could be life or death situations. So you have to follow orders in order to maintain the safety. So the goal in that instance is safety, potentially, obviously very, very high on the list. So in terms of those 2, the goals, it's in terms of the goals. When we move into the fox is the compromiser. So at this point, we might give up a little, we might give away a little, we may actually get something from the other person because we're willing to give a little. In terms of the bottom right-hand corner, get my left and right, so the right way around. In terms of the bottom right-hand corner, we have the teddy bear. This is where you highly value the relationship, but actually in terms of your goals, the relationship is far more important to maintain. It's about making sure that the focus is on the relationship. However, it can also feel like you are being maybe taken a bit advantage of sometimes. So none of these are bad, none of these are good. They just are how you react in a conflict situation. The final one, the owl in the top right-hand corner, is essentially the mediator. It's the collaborator. They gather the information, they hear from both sides, they talk through alternatives, they speak openly and respectfully. Now, you think that's the one we all want to aim for, and quite often that might be the case. But actually, every single one of these conflict styles has their place. So the owl is incredibly time-consuming. If you need to make quick decisions, being an owl isn't necessarily the right conflict style to have. You may need to be a shark. So if we can just bring up the first question of the poll.
I've brought up the first one. We have to do them one at a time. So I've put the first one up, which is when you hear one of your colleagues teasing another.
Yeah. So what conflict style are you most likely to use in that situation?
Me, probably the turtle, because I don't get too involved.
And you know what? That's a common response at that point. You don't want to get too involved. Yeah. So in those instances, you're in a situation where you don't necessarily know what's going on. You don't necessarily have all the information, and maybe you don't even have any goals related to that situation.
Yeah. I suppose it depends how much you value the job as well, how long you're going to be there for.
Absolutely. Yeah. We hear the word depends a lot. It depends on the specific situation, and these are purposely vague, these questions.
The majority is saying turtle at the moment. Some are saying teddy.
Yeah.
Can you see the responses up on your screen as well?
Yeah, I've just switched over. If anybody wants to put why they've put a particular response, obviously I would be really interested to see. But we'll move on to the next poll question.
Okay, I'll end this one now. So the majority were turtle for that one.
So for this one, someone cuts in front of you in a queue. Which of the 5 styles do you think you would most identify with in that situation?
This might be a bit different, maybe. Got fairly even spread at the moment.
At the moment, yeah. So you've been stood in that queue for a while, and somebody cuts in front of you when you've been stood there for a while. What do you do? Oh, that's the point we start seeing sharks creeping.
Yeah, I think that would be me as well.
Yeah, it's always interesting asking this question to people that are specifically in the UK, because we're known as the world's best queuers.
Really?
Yeah, we know how a queue should look, and normally everybody is sharks at this point.
Yeah, most the same shark.
Oh well, maybe they're not.
We have a lot of people
the
from
UK
other countries with us today.
No, it is useful to say. So, my response in this situation, it depends on what sort of day I'm having. I always use the example of I'm stood in a queue at the supermarket, so I'm off to go and buy my food shopping. Somebody cuts in front of me, and I've only maybe got a couple of things in my basket. Yeah, you carry on. It's fine. If I've got a full trolley, I'm going to fight for my space in that queue. So I'm either a shark or a turtle. I have to admit, I'm a shark or a turtle.
Yeah. Depends how much stuff they've got as well, how long they're going to take.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you everybody for that. If you want to bring the next question up, the last question.
Okay.
So this is about thinking about when you have disputes, arguments, fallings out with people that you love. So it could be your best friend, it could be your husband, wife, girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever. How do you react in those situations?
Got a few foxes. Less sharks for this one.
That's a relief. Otherwise,
probably a good thing.
Yeah.
Partners around.
This question always makes me smile because I'd like to think I'm an owl with my husband, but I'm not convinced I am. Sometimes I think I sometimes do come out as shark, but that's only because I get frustrated sometimes. Because men don't listen.
Yeah. I'm sure everyone does, but sometimes.
Look, I'm just as guilty as not listening. So it's interesting. Since I've started becoming a mediator, though, since I became a workplace mediator, my conflict style has changed dramatically. So just while people are finishing off this poll, I used to be a turtle. Absolutely. Every time I heard a raised voice or it was a situation that I could feel the temperature raising a little bit, I would immediately step out of the situation and go and run away and hide, metaphorically speaking. Since becoming a mediator and being taught the skills to deal with conflict constructively in a psychologically safe way, I've moved towards the right-hand side. So I'm more of a fox stroke owl, depending on the situation. So it's amazing the effect the right skills can have.
Yeah.
Yeah, massively. It's quite a fun.
Seems like we have most foxes for this.
Yeah, with these questions, what we generally see is people moving from the left-hand side of this graph to the right-hand side because the relationship becomes more important.
Yeah.
That's what this demonstrates. It also demonstrates in different situations we will have different reactions, and therefore, so will other people.
That makes sense.
So we'll move on to psychologically safe conflict next. So how to have constructive conflict.
Okay, thank you. I will disappear for the next few minutes.
So psychologically safe conflict, that conflict that is constructive, that allows us to have those respectful conversations, to be able to deal with conflict, either as an owl or as a fox, somewhere on that right-hand side. So first of all, have a think about people's reactions. We've talked about the different conflict styles. When you are in conflict, one of the 4 F's is triggered. So you go into fight mode, which potentially is the shark. You want to challenge back immediately. And because you want to do it immediately, it may not necessarily be done in the right way. Flight is technically the turtle, could be freeze as well. Flight is in terms of running away from the situation, hoping it'll go away. Freeze, you can't make a decision, you can't make a choice, you don't know what to do. And fawn quite often is the teddy bear response. You kind of give in to try and resolve the conflict. And what often happens in that situation is your needs aren't met. In any one of these 4 F's, your needs are not met. If you remember back to the iceberg earlier on, what sits underneath conflict is our needs not being met. For any of these 4 F's, that is not happening. What we are aiming to do is do the 5th F, which is forward. It's future focused. It's about thinking what a safe conflict situation, a psychologically safe conversation is in this situation. Okay? It's about innovation. It's about creativity. It's about building relationships moving forward. So how do we do that? Let's go back to what we were talking about earlier on in terms of the 3 C's. So in order to maintain or rebuild the connection, we have to have respectful communication. You have to feel heard. Notice it's not necessarily about them completely agreeing with your situation. It's about being heard. Take time to appreciate each other's truths. I spoke earlier about the 3 truths, yours, theirs, and the truth. Conflict is often that where the perception gap lives in those truths. And understanding where the perception gap is and appreciating the gap is our first steps into psychologically safe conflict. Having empathy for each other's situation. Having empathy for that perception. Again, it's not about agreeing. It's about understanding that actually somebody will view the situation in a different way to how you look at it. In terms of consistency, we need to have a chance to take back a level of autonomy or control. So workplace mediation allows that. So in workplace mediation, for those, if you're not sure, it's entirely self-determined. Those in the room write their own agreement. It is very different from many other styles of mediation. What that does is it gives back control to the people who are in the conflict. It's not human resources telling them what they need to do. It's not even me as mediator telling them what to do. I am there as that impartial third party at all times. Consistency can also be achieved when change is managed in a way that focuses on maintaining the connection. And by that, I mean it's communicated properly. It's communicated in a way that respects the viewpoints of those in front of them. So I said earlier on about our natural suspicion of change. We are less suspicious when we feel that things have been explained properly and that our emotions, our feelings and needs have been taken into account. And we also get the chance to understand. And finally, in terms of contribution, essentially our value is recognised. The mediation arena creates an environment where you are free to acknowledge you may have made a mistake. You're free to acknowledge your part in a situation, but you don't have to. There's nobody forcing you to. It is your choice. You are given back the choice. It helps to rebuild the confidence in yourself because you have the opportunity to put your side of the story over in a psychologically safe conversation. So that's what we're talking about in terms of constructive conflict. Constructive and psychologically safe conflict are interchangeable. They are the same thing. So how do we do that? We listen to hear. If anybody's heard of Stephen Covey, he wrote the 7 Habits. He talks about people listening. Most people do not listen with the intent to understand. They listen with the intent to reply. Think about conversations you've had with people. How often are you really looking at how you're going to respond to that situation? I know I'm guilty of that. I'll be thinking of a response rather than necessarily what is actually being said. You need to close the communication loop. And the picture on the right-hand side demonstrates what I mean by that. So you have 2 people talking to each other. I'll just talk about this in a mediation context. So the party talks to the mediator about what's happened. The message is initiated. As a mediator, we receive that message and we acknowledge it. We do that by summarizing what that person said. We do that by paraphrasing. We do that by reframing and repeating back what's been said. The message has been received and acknowledged. The party then says, yeah, that's exactly what I meant. They verify the message. Or actually, no, this is what I meant instead. What we need to try and do to encourage psychologically safe conflict is to do that in our everyday lives. What I think I'm hearing you say is this. That's probably the phrase I say the most in a mediation. We need to try and be non-judgmental. It is so easy to be judgmental. So easy. Because our brains do it to keep us safe. We have to make judgments because we need to know which of the 4 F's we're going to put into play. Are we going to run? Are we going to freeze? When we're having conversations with people, we don't need to engage those judgments. We just need to listen. Make time for the conversation. I've lost count of how many conflicts have started because, oh God, they had a conversation with me as they were going off for a meeting. You don't get a chance to listen to hear. You don't get a chance to be non-judgmental. Make the time for the conversations. It is about mutual respect. Absolutely it is. It's not about agreeing. It's about having respect for the other person's perception, whether you agree or not. And it is okay to not agree. And finally, empathy, not sympathy. Now, there is no better person to talk about empathy than Brene Brown. Anybody that has heard of Brene Brown, she is a wonderful author, professor in America, who focuses very much on vulnerability and empathy. And I've just realized I may not be able to play this video, Phoebe, so I may have to send it out afterwards. But what it does is it demonstrates the difference between empathy and sympathy. Am I able to play it, or can you play it for me?
Is it a YouTube video or is it an MP4? A YouTube. Okay, if you send me the link really quickly, if you put it in the chat maybe,
yeah,
might be able to quickly upload it. Not promising anything, but we'll give it a go.
We'll get it sent out afterwards, I promise.
Some people would like access to the slides as well. Is it okay if we could share those?
Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you.
That's fine. Oh, wait a second. I'm just trying to get the link now, and it's brought up an advert first, which is not helpful.
Don't worry.
Right, it's going in the chat now.
Okay, so I'll try and upload it quickly. We'll play it for everyone to see. Here we go.
So what is empathy? And why is it very different than sympathy?
Very different than sympathy.
Empathy fuels connection, Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with...
Marie, can you mute your microphone, please? Okay, I think because we had them both playing at the same time, I'll just resume this one.
Professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you climb down. I know what it's like down here. And you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no. You want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
That has to be one of my favourite videos ever.
Yeah, that's really nice. It's so cute as well with the animal. It's funny.
Absolutely. So just to finish off then, just in terms of that, one of the key points to take away from that video is that empathy drives connection. Connection is one of the 3 C's of psychological safety. So empathy is a huge, huge part of ensuring not only your own psychological safety, but also the psychological safety of those around you.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much, Marie, for that wonderful presentation. I wasn't quite sure if you were done then, but
that's what I thought about telling you.
Oh, well, I feel like I've learned so much in just an hour. It's such a broad topic, isn't it? It's useful to us in our everyday lives. We've had some really nice feedback in the chat, people saying that they don't often get to hear about this stuff. So, yeah. Do we have time for just a couple of questions?
Absolutely.
Oh, thank you. We have one person in the chat called Ajit who would like to know, how do we deal with a client ready to fire back without hearing?
So for me, that is very much about understanding the situation. It's about taking time to take a step back. If somebody is in the grip of an emotion, I wouldn't try and have the conversation at that point. I would say, look, I need to talk to you about something. Can we come back and have a chat about it? Maybe over a cup of tea, a cup of coffee, over a piece of cake, whatever. Also, one of the things I like to do as a mediator is set ground rules. So my ground rules are always mutual respect and mutual listening. So one of the tools that I use in my mediator role is something called uninterrupted speaking time, which is literally you say what you need to say for a couple of minutes, then I'll say what I need to say. We do it uninterrupted. So if you're really struggling to get somebody to take a step back and to engage in the conversation, use uninterrupted speaking time.
Thank you, Marie. And another question from Ajit again. He asked a lot of questions, a lot longer than ours. He's asked, how do we boost connection with a client but also remain professional? So I suppose show empathy, but staying professional.
Yeah, absolutely. It's important to remember, I always have in my head the 3 truths. So just because my truth isn't the same as their truth doesn't mean I'm right and they're wrong, or vice versa. Sometimes it's just about understanding that there's just a different viewpoint in the situation. And you don't have to agree with it, the same as they don't have to agree with yours. That's a difficult thing to wrap your head around sometimes, because we can generally be quite opinionated as human beings because of that judgment. So it is very much about reserving judgment and use of empathy. Absolutely.
Thank you, Marie. Someone's asked a very specific question about autism. I don't know if you have much experience dealing with individuals with autism.
I do, yes.
You do? Okay. Someone's asked, how can we deal with people with autism, especially children, when it comes to helping them to calm down? And how do we help them to avoid conflicts with other children?
Okay, well, it's important to remember you cannot avoid conflict. Okay, now those who have neurodiverse conditions, not just autism, Asperger's, dyslexia, dyspraxia, all of those on that list, it is about mutual understanding. That's probably the biggest thing, is that mutual understanding that actually in that situation, that person isn't reacting to a situation, they're reacting to what's going on inside of them. Okay, that's where the empathy piece comes in. So whoever is supporting those people, I know a lot of the workplaces that I work in, somebody with who is on the spectrum, on the autism spectrum, they very often have support people that work with them. And I make sure I have conversations with those people so that they are the best supported they can be in those situations. So it's about building understanding. There may be an education piece there in terms of children, so that children can understand on their level what a neurodiverse condition is. So that might be a good place to start, so that they understand that actually their friend is like that, but they're going to come across those people in later life as well. I guarantee it. I don't know if that's helpful.
That's really helpful. That's a really informative answer. Thank you. I think that we can probably wrap things up here. I think we've answered most of the questions that we had. And I'd really like to thank you for your time. It's been such a great session for us all. Yeah. I have learned my style of conflict. It's been very entertaining. So I'd just like to remind all of our participants, please do fill out the feedback form, which Karima just posted in the chat, in order to receive your e-certificates. And if you'd like to hear anything more from MediateGuru, you can follow us on our Twitter, Instagram, YouTube channel as well, where this video will be uploaded. Sorry, Marie. And we are at MediateGuru on all of those handles. And Marie, I think, said that it was okay for us to share the slides with you from today too. So
absolutely. My email address is there as well. If anybody, you're more than welcome to email directly if anybody wants to have a chat about specific situations.
Oh, thank you, Marie. That's really nice of you. Okay. Thank you, everyone, and have a lovely rest of your day.